A top US aviation attorney, Mary Schiavo, has told us that she thinks that basis the Air India preliminary crash investigation report, it is impossible and wrong to blame the pilots. In fact, she goes so far as to say that it is the plane, the 787, that is suspect. She also argues that there is clear precedence to show that the 787 is like what she calls a flying computer, a highly computerized and electronic aircraft, which she says has shown signs in the past of a software glitch. According to her, the 787 itself is suspect unless proven otherwise, and she is categorical that the pilots must not and should not be blamed basis available evidence. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo Story. Our relentless focus on what went down in Air India 171 32 seconds after it took off from Ahmedabad continues here on the Mojo Story. Pilots forums serving and retired are now challenging the findings and the ambiguous language of the Air India preliminary crash report. A report that pilots are arguing are riddled with so many ambiguities and open ended language that it has left space wide open for speculation and for theories that have led to finger pointing at the pilots. This is exactly what experts are warning against. In fact, the Global Pilots Forum has specifically said that the scrutiny that Captain Sumeet Sabharwal, the commander of the plane, whose father you see in these images has come under, is patently wrong and unfair. Captain Sumeet Sabharwal was in fact considering retiring to look after his aging father, but you have at least one aviation expert in India and sections of the Western press and the Western pilot community that have basically blamed him in particular for what happened on Air India, something that has made the pilots community furious. On the program today, we'll be looking at two central questions. Did the engines fail first, or did the engines fail as a result of the fuel control switches transitioning, to borrow a word from the Air India report itself? And the second question that we'll be looking at is what is missing in the report. Several experts that we've been talking to have listed and documented for us things that the report should have addressed but doesn't. Let me introduce two very distinguished guests today to help us decode what the report tells us, what it doesn't, and what might happen next. Joining me is a Captain J.P. Singh, who has, of course, been both an Air Force veteran as well as a commercial airline commander. Good to see you on the program, sir. And joining us back is Wing Commander Panikkar. Wing Commander Panikkar has again been both an Air Force veteran as well as the commander of the 787 Dreamliner. He's flown it for 10 years, and I think he has hands-on experience of what is being debated. I'll get first comments from both of you, and then I actually want to play out a clip of what US Aviation Attorney Mary Schiavo said to me about why she thinks it's both impossible and wrong to blame the pilots basis available information. I'll start with you, Wing Commander Panikkar. This is something that you've been saying, that given what we know so far, those who are talking about pilot error, or worse, slanderously talking about, suicide missions and so on, are completely out of line. And you have focused essentially, if I'm not wrong, on the fact that it is your belief that the engines failed first and only then was there any movement of the fuel control switches, possibly in response to the engine failure. So I want to ask you to explain this one last time, why pilots are so furious right now over this report.
Okay, Barkha, let's just see what we have available at this point in time. This point has been discussed time and time again. The focus that I would like to give is the timeline. The present report, which has come out via the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, has given us a little bit of detail. It has not given us really a timeline as to when it's happened, what time it's happened, who has said what, etc., etc. So at this point in time, with the available information or the available inputs, I have the following to state. The engines have transitioned, a term that is not commonly used in India, have transitioned from run to cutoff. Both have transitioned within a period of 1 second. My contention is, having flown this aircraft for 10 years, 4,500 hours in command, it is physically impossible to
Mm-hmm.
take your attention off a takeoff. You're looking out of the head up display, you're involved in the takeoff, you're concentrating on doing a safe takeoff. Now you take your attention away from the outside, look inside. Mind you, your eyes have to refocus because you're there in far vision, you're focusing outside. You have to come to near vision inside the cockpit. Identify the correct switch, pick it up off its spring loaded setting, move it to the cutoff position, and release it. Then take your hand to the other switch, pick it up, move it to its cutoff position, and release it. Physically, if you do this and try and do it at the fastest way possible, you still can't do it within a second. So, my belief is that whereas on the other side, if you look at an electronic signal, I can have 20 electronic signals in 1 second because it's just electronics, it's software driven. So now, when the switch has moved or when the switch is resting in the run position,
Yeah.
several things are happening. One is that the first time that the switch comes on, the spar valve, which is basically inside your main tank, comes
Mm.
open. The engine fuel valve comes open, and several other contact switches or micro switches within the housing of this fuel control switch make contact, giving electronic commands to various systems on the aircraft, primarily the FADEC. The FADEC being the full authority digital engine control. So the EEC or the engine electronic control of that gives various commands to various items and components within the whole system in the engine, in the aircraft.
Can I
To then,
interject briefly? Can I
yes,
interject briefly just so that I know that I am understanding this correctly? One, you believe that according to this report, 3 seconds after takeoff, the fuel control switches have transitioned. Again, I'm quoting from the report. None of us actually use this word transition, but have transitioned from run mode to cutoff mode. And you're saying that physically it is actually impossible for this to happen 1 second within 1 second of the other. Point one. The second point you seem to be making is that the switches may not have physically moved, but the signals could suggest otherwise. The electronic signals could suggest otherwise.
yes. When the fuel control switch is in the run position, there are
Yes.
several micro switches within the housing of this fuel control switch. Because when the switch is moved from the cutoff to the idle, let's say during the engine start, several signals have to go to various components to start that engine. That's in the initial part. So there are a lot of electrical signals or electronic signals, as you may say, that are
Yeah.
going to various components in the aircraft. Primarily the FADEC. And the FADEC is the guy who is controlling everything. The fuel flow, the rate of the fuel flow, it monitors something called the thrust lever angle, it monitors the ambient temperature, it gives everything that is required to be able to do a successful start. So we have FADEC available on almost all modern jetliners. In fact, even in fighters also we have.
Yeah.
And basically, the idea of the FADEC is to have a more efficient and a more controlled manner in which these engines have to run. Do
So,
keep
so,
in
so
mind
it,
engines that run for extremely long periods of time. Like an ultra long haul flight can last for 16 hours, 17 hours. I'm talking about the Dreamliner. So a continuous monitoring of all these factors, a continuous monitoring of fuel flow,
yeah.
a continuous monitoring of temperatures, everything is controlled and directed by the FADEC.
So to start with, before I bring in Captain JP Singh, your central sort of thing that doesn't add up for you is this suggestion that the fuel control switches have been physically moved by one of the pilots 1 second after the other. You're saying that's physically impossible, and the DFDR, which we call the black box, may have picked up electronic signals as opposed to the actual physical movement of the switch, which may or may not have happened. Now, Captain JP Singh, before I ask you to respond to this, I want to take our viewers through some points that are missing in the report according to pilots. This is basis interviews that of on record, but also on background conversations I've had with those who fly. And these are some of the questions that they have raised on what is missing in this report. One is, why is the CVR, the cockpit conversation, quoted selectively without any context? The second is, where is the entire CVR transcript? Then there is no timestamp for the disclosed interpretation of the cockpit conversation. In other words, at the time when one pilot is saying to the other, why did you cut off? And pilot two is saying, I did not. Where is the timestamp for this disclosed interpretation of cockpit conversation? Fourth, we are being told that there is no exact time or altitude stamp for the physical movement of the fuel control switches. And there is also, and this is an interesting point, no time and altitude stamp for the RAT deployment. Now, in the report, there is a CCTV picture, Captain JP Singh, we can bring it up in fact, which shows very clearly that the RAT has been deployed. But the report only says shortly after takeoff. The RAT, of course, auto deploys if the engines fail. But as we are pointing out, there is no timestamp for it. So we don't actually know whether the RAT deployed as the engines failed, or did the fuel control switches, were they moved causing the engines to fail, which is the insinuation, not the allegation, but the insinuation. Captain JP, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Barkha, firstly, for inviting me. Secondly, I totally agree with what the Captain, sorry, what's
Panikar.
his name, Panikar
Panikar.
said.
Yes.
Yeah. The thing is that, what he is saying is absolutely right, because whether it has happened due to electrical stacking or it is due to failure of the FedEx, both the failures of the FedEx due to electrical stacking has known to happen, and there was an AD issued to that effect. So after that, the AD has been sort of implemented within Air India all aircraft. But what my point is, in the lab conditions, it shows that the stacking occurs in 246 days. And now they've cut the time down to 120 days. That means after 120 days, all Dreamliners are supposed to shut off and reset their systems. Because electronic systems, like it was brought out by Venkamata Pednekar, is that, it is a very, very uh, delicate part of the software which can malfunction at any time, and it is known to malfunction. So engine failure, to my mind, has taken up. And also what I'd like to suggest is, like he said, the DFDR takes the input from the FedEx. So if FedEx shows loss of fuel supply, it will give the same indication to the people as if fuel control switches have been put to shut off. So the signal from the fuel control switch only goes to the FedEx, through which the flight data recorder picks up the thing, or the enhanced airborne flight data recorder. It picks up the signals from there. So maybe the first indication of the switch being put to shut off has happened is because of the electrical stacking and failure of FedEx. That indication has been taken up, and thereafter, if the engine failure and RAT deployment, like you said, there's no time frame been put. If the both engines have failed at 3 seconds after takeoff and the RAT has already deployed, the aircraft height, what it would be at that particular time. If he's just got airborne, he won't be more than 120 feet of height from the ground. And he's gone and crashed there. Actually, if this has happened, he should have crashed within the airfield itself. He wouldn't have gone so far.
But here's my question. As I understand it, Captain JP Singh and Wing Commander Panikar, please feel free to jump in as well. The central debate seems to be that the report doesn't say anything directly, but by saying that 3 seconds into takeoff, the fuel control switches transition, the report seems to be suggesting that the fuel control switches were the movement of the fuel control switches led to the engine failure. Both of you are saying the engine failure happens first, and then either the pilots move to reset the engines using the fuel control switches, or something else happens that we are not clear of, right? So are you also saying that you believe that the engines failed first and not that the movement of the fuel control switches caused the engines to fail? Captain JP?
Yes, definitely. I mean, that is definitely the premise, because if the RAT is already deployed when the aircraft is just rotated, then
Hmm.
even 3 seconds doesn't make sense. That means it's actually happened earlier, because rat deployment takes those 2 to 3 seconds. And that can happen only when both engines fail simultaneously, and they can fail simultaneously only due to two reasons: either electrical stacking, or it is due to uh, uh, engine this thing,
Right.
fuel contamination.
So
Because
briefly,
there
Wing
is no
Commander.
way two
Sorry,
switches can
sorry.
fail simultaneously.
Yeah,
There's some probability given as 1 in 70 billion case or something, that both will fail simultaneously.
sure. So, Wing Commander Panikkar, if you would briefly respond. Again, I want to read out what pilots are saying is missing in this report because it becomes very relevant to what both of you are saying. Apart from the fact that the CVR, because you see, if both engines are failed, then those who are pointing fingers at the pilots are going to say, if the engines failed, why did one pilot say to the other, why did you cut off? And the other pilot say, no, I did not. If the engines failed, the manual would ask you to reset, and therefore the manual would ask you to go from run to cut off and back to run, which is eventually what happens. That's what you are trained to do. But because, and I'm going to go through this again, this is very important. What is missing in this report, and I'm going to just go through it once more. Why is the CVR selectively quoted without context? Why are the CVR transcripts in their entirety missing? Why is there no timestamp for this disclosed interpretation that everybody is quoting? Why did you cut off? No, I did not. Why is there no time or altitude stamp for physical movement of the fuel control switch? And why is there no time and altitude stamp for rat deployment? Do Captain JP and you both seem to be saying that the engines failed basis the rat deployment, but we don't have a timestamp for the rat deployment. But can we bring up that image? Can we bring up that image because it shows it's right? It's right after takeoff. I know that you can see that it's right after takeoff. There it is. Go ahead first, Wing Commander Panikkar, then Captain JP.
Okay, just a few points.
Yeah,
This is like Captain JP said. There are a few conditions which indicate automatic deployment of the rat. The first condition is that both engines are failed, as has been in this particular case. The
yeah,
second is all three hydraulic system pressures are low. Okay, which would normally happen if both the engines are failed. It will take some time for the hydraulic pressures. Mind you, these are all high pressure systems. They're all 5,000 psi systems, and every system is running at that point in time during the takeoff. The third point is loss of all electrical power to the captain and first officer's flight instruments, or loss of all your four electric pumps
yeah,
that in during the flight control system during the approach, which in this case is not applicable. And also the fifth case, loss of all these four electromagnetic pumps, and an engine fails on takeoff or landing. Again, this last part is not applicable. So we will
yeah,
just take the first part of a simultaneous failure of both engines. Number one, there is no checklist that can be written for a dual engine failure at this particular stage of flight. Nowhere. Because this is something like a kill box. Where you reach, there is no escape from this. If
mm-hmm.
something happens immediately after takeoff, if you don't have, let's say, a 4,000-foot runway ahead of you, or a 5,000-foot runway ahead of you, there's absolutely no chance. So there can be nothing that can be written for an emergency like this. What is written for a dual engine failure envisages something at altitude. When you have 30,000, 40,000, presumably in a cruise, or presumably in the later stages of a climb, or in the
Yeah,
later stages of a descent.
yeah,
Then the actions are straightforward. You have to recycle, just like you said, Barkha. You have to recycle the fuel control switches. You have to take them from run, put them to off, both of them, and put them back on again, and manually deploy the ram air turbine. There is a switch within the cockpit in the overhead panel, which is called the rat switch. So you have to take it off, take the card off, push it.
so
So that the
sorry, sorry, hang on. You're saying the engines fail, the rat deploys, but because the engines have failed, the pilots will try to relight the engines, in which case they have to take their switches from run to cut off back to run. And when they're doing this, they have to manually deploy the rat again. Sorry, please forgive me my ignorance, but I'm just trying to follow this.
no. I am just telling you the procedure
Yeah,
which is mandated in the case of a dual engine failure. I
yeah,
reiterate again that this dual engine failure on takeoff cannot be catered for by anybody anywhere in the world, no matter what you
Got
fly.
it.
On
Got
a
it.
commercial aircraft with two engines, if both engines are failed immediately after takeoff, as in this case, there's nothing you can do. And even in the case of a relight, depending upon what stage of deceleration of the engine, what RPM, what N2 RPM has been reached, how quickly it manages to capture it and do a relight, the time frame, it will be far more than what was available to the crew on this particular flight. Just to give
But
you
you
an example.
see,
No, one
but see,
second. Just
sir.
no,
Okay.
let me just
Okay.
finish this.
Yeah.
Like at altitude, the book says that a relight might take as long as 2 minutes. That's a long period of time. That's at altitude where the air is much more rare and stuff like that. Here it's practically sea level. But be that as it may, I have just outlined the procedure. Visualize what is happening, Barkha. The guys have just taken off. They're focusing on carrying out a safe takeoff. And suddenly there is a loss of thrust. Suddenly there is the both engines have failed. You can see upon your ICAS that your RPMs are winding down, and you are not able to maintain the takeoff altitude. And now you're looking inside to find out what the hell has happened. Maybe the master caution has come on, maybe an oral warning has come on. All stuff is happening together. It is not cut and dried things in which you have time for it. You can look for it, you can analyze, figure out what to
Yeah.
do, then do memory. There's no time for all this.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
what I've told you about the rat is that in this case, without a doubt, the rat has deployed automatically. The procedure would be to put your fuel control switches to cut off and thereafter put the rat. I don't think there would have been time for any of that. And they wouldn't have known in any case at that point in time whether the rat is deployed or not.
Okay.
It'll
Okay.
come on.
And the other question, Captain JP Singh, is that the rat also takes a few seconds to deploy, right? So when that CCTV image shows us that the rat is already auto deployed,
Yeah.
the engines could have, please pardon me if I'm getting anything wrong. I am not a pilot, I am not an expert, I'm just trying to be a journalist following the story. But my understanding is that if the rat takes a few seconds to deploy, the engines would have had to have failed even before that, because the
Yes.
rat is auto deploying in response to the engines failing. So at
Yes.
this moment on takeoff, when we see the rat deployed, the engines have already failed before this moment.
Yes, and that's why my confusion is how come the aircraft has gone so far ahead? If it has failed, everything, rat is deployed by 100 feet. How has he crashed at, close to 1.8 kilometers away? That is
Yeah.
why I'm thinking that, it may not be engine failure, both of them due to electrical stacking, because if it has happened at rotation, I think they've had some kind of partial power till the time that they've gone, and which happens only with fuel contamination.
So you believe, what is your prima facie belief, Captain
No,
JP
I
Singh?
think both these are possible. But now with the rat deployment, what Palekar has said is, with the rat deployment happening automatically, and it happens only when both engines fail. It's
Yeah.
very straightforward that okay, whatever the reason, the fact is the engines have failed before the pilots have had time to intervene or reset the switches. That belief is very strong with me at the moment, as things stand at present, because it's not that he failed the engine and then he asked the other guy, oh, did you shut off the fuel, shut off valves? Because also I'm interested, though it says pilot 1 and pilot 2, I'm not very sure, because in this case pilot flying was the
Was the
first officer,
co-pilot? Was, yeah, the first
was
officer was
P2,
flying,
yes.
and Captain Sumeet Sabharwal
Yes,
was in fact
pilot
monitoring.
monitoring.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes.
So if this call has come from pilot 1, assuming it is Captain Sabharwal, then in that case it makes even less sense, because you can't just put out the switches and say confirm you shut off the switches. I mean, like, in the cockpit environment, that's why I'm very keen on getting the CVR. Barkha, what happens is when they push back, there is something called cockpit culture. A lot of accidents, because you hear the full tape, the full CVR, you get to know a lot of things. A lot of things, there are a lot of hints coming on what is the cockpit culture. Here they would have rolled 80 knot speed check, they would have done V1, VR, rotate. And after rotate, what you're looking for is positive rate, and you say gear up, because
Mm,
you don't hear
yeah,
that call positive rate. That obviously, if the engines have failed, and where is going to be the positive rate?
yeah. Yeah. So these are among the many things that are missing, as we've been mentioning in the transcript, the complete transcript of the cockpit conversation. What is actually being said before takeoff is also relevant. What is the mood in the cockpit? What is the context in which this one sentence? And as as somebody said to me today, there is no timestamp for the disclosed interpretation of the cockpit conversation. It's very important to remember that what is in the preliminary report is not a verbatim but a paraphrase. Why did you cut off? I did not. Even the word fuel is not there. Why did you cut off? I did not, is how it has been presented in the report. And this is a question being asked. Why is there no timestamp for the disclosed interpretation? Now, I want to, for both of you, play out a very important interview. I interviewed a US aviation attorney, Mary Schiavo. She used to be the Inspector General of the US Department of Transportation. And the full interview is available on our platform, but I will just play out the operative bit for you on why she thinks that the plane is suspect, that the plane is like a flying computer, that the plane has suffered from software glitches in the past. She talks about the Nippon Airways incident in 2019 in Osaka when both engines quit on landing, and why she thinks that it's so wrong to blame the pilots right now, basis available information. Take a look at this. Elaborate on that. When you say that it is impossible at this moment to blame the pilots because it is such a highly computerized system and it is known to have had glitches in the past, can we actually start with the Japan incident that you mentioned with All Nippon, where basically the 787, both engines quit on landing? Talk a little bit about this. Take us through this incident and what it says to you.
Well, what that says to me on the All Nippon Airways, and fortunately, no one was hurt or no one was killed, but the plane has many systems, and this particular system was mandated by the United States Federal Aviation Administration, and it wanted the plane to have the ability, all by itself, pilots didn't have to do this, to sense whether it's in the air or on the ground. And the reason for that is if the plane was on the ground, they wanted the aircraft to be able to cut the thrust control, literally do cut off. So the plane on the ground didn't have, runaway engines, run into other planes, run off the end of the runway, etc. So the plane itself will sense when it's in the air and when it's on the ground. And what happened in the ANA flight back in 2019 is the plane thought it was already on the ground and it was still in the air. And, for a pilot, you look out the window if unless you're in severe instrument flying conditions in the weather, but when you're in the air and when you're on the ground. But the aircraft was supposed to assist in that, and they have this system where it will cut the engines if the plane itself thinks it's on the ground. Very important thing to examine. It's happened before, and until that is also examined along with a myriad other things, that's an issue for me. Sure. I mean, my first impression, again, it's based on my prior work. I mean, so many cases I've worked on where the knee-jerk reaction was to blame the pilots. And years later, it was proven the pilots didn't do this. It was the aircraft. And there were problems with the aircraft. So my initial impression of the preliminary report, and of course, they had to get this out. The international guidelines are you put a preliminary report out at 30 days. And there's warnings on it that says this is just a preliminary report. This doesn't prove anything. So my initial reaction is still the plane suspect until shown otherwise, because with a plane this advanced, the plane that's highly computerized, until we do all these examinations and look at all the evidence, it is not only unfair, but it's simplistic and harmful to blame the pilots, because that cuts off reasonable investigation into other areas unless you say, no, we're not going to just blame the pilots, because many times I have seen this and many times we've been able to disprove that.
If you say the plane is suspect unless shown otherwise, would you at this point, and this has happened before, the 737s were grounded, Boeing had to go back to the drawing board. They had to fix the issue. I think, if I'm not wrong, you have said elsewhere that even after the All Nippon case, Boeing was alerted and they did have to acknowledge design issues. At this point, would you be looking at saying the plane remains the key suspect, the plane is suspect, and therefore, would you be saying grounded till further notice? There are 1,200 of them worldwide.
Well, I probably would, but then I'm very cautious. I probably would put out a what's called a service bulletin or a warning to have everyone inspect the system and inspect it now. Now, you can do that. It depends how it's ordered. Sometimes it's an emergency order and you must do it immediately before any more flights. And sometimes they give them 30 days, 10 days, 6 months to do it. But I think those systems have to be checked worldwide. Sure.
So, 2, 3 important things, Wing Commander Panikkar and Captain JP Singh from that interview. 1, impossible to blame the pilots. 2, it's like a flying computer. 3, what happened in 2019 when the Nippon Airways plane basically quit both engines on landing, thankfully on landing, points to the fact that without pilot intervention, these things can happen. And B, there should be a worldwide service bulletin to check the planes. At the moment, DGCA has mandated that fuel switches should be checked. Air India was checking them even before the DGCA order came. Etihad was checking them before the DGCA order came. But her submission that the plane is suspect unless shown otherwise. I'll start with you, Wing Commander Panikkar. You've flown this plane for 10 years. It is a highly electronic plane, a highly computerized plane. When you look at what happened in 2019, when you're looking at what may or may not have happened in 2025, what would you say to Mary Schiavo's assertion?
Okay. First and foremost, this aircraft has been dubbed as the electric jetliner. This is simply the most advanced Boeing aircraft of their fleet. It is, like you've mentioned earlier, it's in service worldwide. There are more than 1,200 odd aircraft flying around. It's logged more than, I think, about 4 million flying hours without incident. Be that as it may, I need to take a little bit of time on this. I was in Vienna when this particular accident had happened on the 12th of June. And we were waiting for the aircraft to come from Delhi to Vienna, which we would operate on that day from Vienna to Washington. When we heard about this dual engine loss of thrust and this horrific crash, my first thought was something dramatic must have happened for something like this to have happened. And logic would suggest that if you've got something unexplained, something that you're not sure exactly what has happened and which way it has happened, you, taking the line of abundant precaution, would issue directives to all and sundry, including the manufacturer, including the original engine manufacturer, the engine manufacturer, including Boeing, and all the operators worldwide. Look, something has happened. We're not really sure at this point in time what has happened. We suspect it could be 1, 2, 3, 4. Please check 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing like this happened. So coming back to this ANA accident, which has happened, this happened during the operation of the thrust levers to idle. That is it's called the TR, the thrust reversers, during this particular point in time. And when Boeing and the Japan Air Safety Board, when they had examined it, they finally analyzed it and said it was possibly because of the rate at which the thrust reversers were taken up. It was apparently taken too quickly, or possibly even before the aircraft had touched down. Now, just to re-emphasize what the lady had said, I think Maria, systems on an aircraft work with micro switches, work with electronic inputs. So there are multiple inputs that tell the aircraft that you have gone from the ground to the air. It is not just the physical movement of the aircraft. Just to give you an example, when the weight of the aircraft is on the wheels, as the aircraft is carrying on its takeoff roll, the weight on the wheels is gradually reducing because of the lift that is being generated by the wings. So at a point in time at which the lift equals the weight of the aircraft is capable of flying. Or in other words, the lift is supporting your weight. So during the process of the takeoff roll, if you can just visualize, your landing gear struts are compressed because of the weight of the aircraft. As weight on these wheels keep reducing, these struts start expanding. They start going up. And then at some point in time, presumably, it makes contact with one or more of these micro switches. So this becomes an input from the landing gear. There are other inputs also which tell an aircraft whether it is on the ground or it is airborne. But coming back to what she said, we have to check all aspects because this is computer driven, it's software driven, it's
Well,
product.
in that case, isn't it odd that the report gave a clean chit to Boeing and GE at this moment? Maybe there's a reason to give a clean chit. I'm not asking for anything drastic, but as Mary Schiavo said, at least do a worldwide bulletin to check everything again.
You're talking about the clean sheet which the
The-
AAIB is given?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I would imagine that it is a little premature
That's my
because
point. I mean, it made, yeah.
unless they know something that we don't, and we obviously don't know enough. And at this point in time, I just want to say, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Board has got everything with them. It has got the cockpit voice recorder, it's got the full DFDR, the EAFR, it's got the timestamp dated CVR, it's got all this information, including the physical position of the switches. So maybe they've got something which they haven't revealed as yet, and obviously
Yeah.
it's not a full
Captain
report.
J.
It's
Captain
only a
JP Singh. Captain JP Singh, when
Yes,
you heard
yes.
the US Aviation Attorney saying two, three things: impossible to blame the pilots, the plane is suspect, the plane is like a flying computer, a software glitch has happened before, there needs to be a worldwide service bulletin to check everything all over again, and that has not happened. That hasn't actually gone out. The opposite has happened. Boeing has insisted that everything is fine, and despite that, individual airlines, individual regulators are in some countries, including our own, are taking abundant precaution and saying check the fuel switches. So far, the only thing that's being checked is the fuel switches because of the focus on them.
Yeah.
Your take, Captain JP.
No, no, what she has said is very relevant. This is an totally electronically dense aeroplane, it's electric aeroplane, electric jetliner, whatever you wish to call it. But, and these software glitches are definitely not unknown. They have happened earlier, like you said, with the Anna, it has happened uh, uh, possibly other times as well, but sometimes it's not reported. And this reports are very, very important. What has happened, what I was talking to you about electrical stacking, all these electrical stacking, the number of glitches in they introduce, because it depends on the number of faults, they keep accumulating, and where they have decided that after 246 days in lab conditions, they find that the glitches built up to enough for the stacking to cause a electrical shorting. So if they cut down the time to 120 days, what if that stacking happens in 60 days? Who knows? This aircraft has come from Delhi, where the temperature that day was 41 to 42 degrees. If you saw the reports, there was a passenger who's complained that air conditioning was not working, because domestic departure in Delhi, I'm not too sure on this, but a lot of times it is done not from the aero bridges, which heats
Hmm.
up the aeroplane, because you've got all the doors open for boarding, and
Hmm.
the temperature, whatever you do with the APU, is not controllable. You cannot get a comfortable temperature. And that
Yeah.
aircraft has come from there, landed there in Ahmedabad. I think when it landed, the temperature was around 36. When it was departing at taxi time, it was 38. So possibly all his calculations were based on 38. But you always build up a safety margin for yourself where you could say it is 40.
Yeah.
Those are high temperatures, for the electrical systems not to behave.
Look, I want to come back in the end to Wing Commander Panikkar. Both of you seem to be in agreement on one thing, that the engines failed. But Captain JP Singh raised a pertinent point. If the engines failed and the rat takes a few seconds to deploy, and the engines failed first, I have two questions. Captain JP also asked this question: how did the plane even lift off to the altitude it did if the engines had failed so quickly into the takeoff moment? That's question one. Question two: are we sure that the switches physically moved at all? You see, one version is, or one interpretation, not one version, one interpretation is the engines fail, the rat deploys, the pilots move from run to cut off back to run to relight the engines. That's one interpretation, in which case the switches were physically moved. The other interpretation is the switches never physically moved. The locking mechanism, something went wrong. The 2018 FAA advisory comes into play. Was there something else? Are these electronic signals being registered on the black box? Did these switches move? And if the engines failed so quickly, how do we understand the cockpit conversation that has been disclosed? And how do we make sense of that one line, half a line that we know?
Okay, I've mentioned this earlier also. If you just, as a layman, just look at the conversation, presumably the person who is asking the first question is Sumeet. He's asking, have you cut off? The logical answer,
Why are you presuming that it's Sumeet? If just to understand, because Sumeet is not flying. Clive is flying.
true, but
Yeah.
the loss of thrust is felt by both, no?
Right.
The loss of thrust, and Sumeet is a guy who is monitoring the instruments. He's a pilot monitoring, so
Correct.
he can possibly see the rate at which the your N1 and N2 and everything is dropping, right? So that is the first input. So now when he's asking, did you cut off, for example, what is
He's
the logical?
asking, why did you, per the report, it says, why did you cut off? I
Yes.
did not.
Yes. So just let's look at the first line. Why did you cut off? The logical interpretation to that is, I'm asking you a question. Why? Because I've not done it myself. I'm asking you, have you done it? To which Clive responds, presumably,
Yeah.
I've not done it. So what is the logical interpretation of this? You see, like, we have very, very limited words to interpret and try and figure out what has happened. My interpretation to this is, it would logically indicate that neither of them at that point in time had anything to do with the fuel control switches. Next point. A signal of an engine failure would take place only after the RPM drops to a certain figure, normally below something called flight idle. So let's say, just for an example, suppose your N1 or N2 is at 100%. It is not that the engine fail will come at 80 or 70 or 60. It will come at a predetermined figure in which the system says it is below the flight idle. Only then the signal of an engine fail would go, right? And this rate of deceleration also will take time. It will not happen automatically unless you've had a catastrophic event in which the engine is dropped off, or the engine has had a seizure in which there is a sudden loss of thrust. Right?
Yeah.
So now this is the first part of the interpretation of this conversation. The second part is, like I said, there is no checklist for a dual engine failure immediately after takeoff. The checklist that exists for a dual engine failure presumably talks about a dual engine failure at altitude. But be that as it may, the procedure to restart would be to take those switches, the fuel control switches, off the run to the cutoff, take the other one off the run to the cutoff, put them back to the run position, and thereafter manually deploy the RAT. Now there is a lot of stuff happening in the cockpit during this takeoff. You've just rotated, sudden loss of thrust. Like I said, all sorts of stuff is happening in the cockpit. Presumably the pilot flying is still flying, because we do not know if Sumeet has taken over the controls at that point in time, or he's dealing with this, trying to relight the engine and allowing Clive to continue. We do not know at this point in time because we simply have inadequate information. It's not just been supplied. And now you're desperately trying to restart this engine, looking in the front, wondering what is happening. There is no time to call for the gear. In any case, there is no gear because there is hydraulic pressure to retract the gear. So all sorts of things are happening together, something that cannot be possibly envisaged even in a simulator. You can't do this sort of thing because, I mean, like I said, it's a kill box. There is no escape from this. There is no escape from this. So if something like this happens, you cannot have a checklist for it. So they did what they could to try and retrieve the situation. Unfortunately, the time was not enough to restart. There is a certain time frame which has been given.
And the altitude was not enough. If this had happened at a different height, the story may have been very different.
Completely different.
Yeah. I just want to say in the end that, there are enough people who have spoken about how Captain Sumeet Sabharwal was in fact contemplating retiring from the airline to look after his aging father. And many people in the aviation community who knew him or even just as pilots are up in arms over the whisper campaign against him. Those in the Western media have gone further. Some in India, one or two people only, have actually gone on record blaming him and, well, specifically him actually. He has been blamed. And it is just as Mary Schiavo, as Wing Commander Panikkar, as Captain JP Singh said, we have such selectively disclosed information at this point that it is the most unfair thing to do. I just want quick comments from both of you as people who have flown on what you feel about those who are blaming pilots. Personally, what does that do to the morale of a pilot? I'll start with you, Captain JP Singh. Captain JP Singh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. No,
Yeah.
it's a very, they've tried to make it into a very simplistic, absolutely open and shut case, because that's not what it is. Because
Yeah.
if you say, okay, the fuel engine fuel switches were placed to cut off within 1 second of each other, then next time they were put on for relight. Only thing I wonder, because I don't know this, I think Panikkar should be able to make this, more clear. If supposing the flight data recorder is picks up from the FedEx, supposing it's picked up that the engine has been placed to engine fuel control switch has been placed to shut off. After that, when you reset it, okay, and you're taking it down, does it again tell you, because it's already showing a shut off position and the DFDR. So when you bring it down, and if they were in the run position, if you bring it down, does the DFDR monitor that thing again, and then or monitors only when you reset it to run position?
I'll let Wing Commander respond to that. Wing Commander?
I wouldn't know myself, because this is
Yeah.
a technical question for which I have no real idea. But I would imagine that the procedure would cater for it. Now, the DFDR would record every event. There are something like 50 odd parameters of the engine which is being recorded every second. There are so many, maybe about 100 plus events which the DFDR is recording of various systems on a continuous basis. So all that information is available. It's all out there. And plus, like I had mentioned on the show earlier, if you can identify a metallic sound which is normally associated with the picking up of the fuel control switch, moving it from run to cut off, it's like a mechanical thing, but it's got a metallic sound to it. And the cockpit voice recorders, there are two of them apparently in the cockpit, they are extremely sensitive. If we can identify, enhance that audio, I'm sure we have the amount of expertise available, correlate it with the time frame at which this particular event has happened. Perhaps you can even pick up that. And then also establish, the DFDR invariably would show this. But I'm saying this is another input that is available to you. If you enhance that audio, you can even probably pick that up. Because the time at which the engines have been physically cut off and put back to run is at some later stage, maybe after about 10 seconds.
It's also important to remember that this flight had 32 seconds all in all, right? And when we talk about it, it feels like they had a lot of time. They had almost no time. They had almost no time to react. The fact that they were still able to give a mayday call, the fact that they are still trying to relight these engines, bring them back. Engine 1 does show progress. The report says it itself. But unfortunately, the preliminary crash investigation report just leaves a mountain of questions with almost no answers. And without these timestamps of these specific things that we've marked out, there is just all kinds of speculation, some of it very slanderous and hurtful to the pilot community, in particular, I imagine, to the families of those who are flying the plane. But we leave it there in search of answers to these questions. We hope they will come as the weeks and months progress. Wing Commander Panikkar, Captain JP Singh, thank you so much for your time and your insights, and to our audience, thank you. Are you trying to say something, Wing Commander Panikkar? Yeah.
I'll just take a minute. I'm one of the few guys that have had a dead stick. That means an engine flame out on a single engine aircraft, on a fighter aircraft, and has successfully force landed on a parallel taxi track. So I know what it feels like not to have an engine. Fortunately, I was making an approach for a taxi track. These poor guys had the runway behind them. They had nothing ahead of them to land.
Yeah.
The event which happened for me, I did a dead stick landing on a parallel taxi track. It took 11 seconds from the time at which the engine flamed out to the time that I touched down. This amount of time, believe you me, time expands because so much of things that you have to do and training takes over. So I think the pilots have done the best that they could. Like you very correctly said, they even found the time to make a mayday call in which, it is, if you look at the timing of the mayday call, it's approximately 2 to 3 seconds before the impact.
Yeah.
They prioritized being professional. They knew that there was no escape. They prioritized being professional at that point in time. I think they've done an amazing job. And I think they should be commended for what they did. Instead of, if I've got tendencies to put a fuel control switch off, why the hell am I trying to relight it?
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is so moving that the pilots knew it was all over, but they were still professional till the very end.
Absolutely. Right? It's a reflection on training. It's a reflection on professionalism. Sumeet had 30 years in the company.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to leave us with that thought that, it's not about, like, at that moment, they would have known that it was all over, that they had nowhere, as you said, the runway was behind them, a building was in front of them, they had nowhere to go, the plane wasn't lifting, there was nowhere for it to land, no open space, and yet they found the time and the presence of mind and the courage to give a mayday call till the very end. Even as they saw the end coming, they showed amazing professionalism, and yet after their deaths, at least sections of the media, sections of commentary have slandered them without evidence, and that is, at this point, with this snippets of information available in this preliminary report, that is just sacrilege, according to me. Thank you so much, Winkamana. Yes, Captain JPC, yes.
Just one more. This aircraft, the way it has crashed is an amazing thing. ELT beacon is supposed to get activated anytime the aircraft hits more than 3.5 G. 3.5 G, there are guys who have, done a heavy landing with 3G. And they've broken up, and ELT beacon has not got activated. So one thing, either it is inoperative, so they need to check. They already got the ELT beacon with them.
Yeah.
They can check whether it didn't operate. Otherwise, he is just kind of at the last moment, he just kept the aircraft like this to prevent himself from falling. So he's kind of been very close to the stall right through. And he's done a very smooth crash, if I want to put it that way, unless they find something different in the data recorder.
Yeah. Amazing. Actually gives you the chills to think about what it means to be somebody who sees death coming, but till the very end is using their hours of flying, their years of training to do the best job that they can. When those 32 seconds, and in fact for the pilots, really 10 to 15 seconds in the cockpit would have felt like their life's test. Unfortunately, ending in the deaths of everybody on board, but not without an attempt to save the plane and the people on board it. Thank you so much, Captain JP Singh, Wing Commander Panikkar, and to our audience. We'll keep tracking this story. See you tomorrow, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.